Hello and welcome to today's lesson. We're going to be talking about exponents, and we're going to be taking a close look at what the definition of an exponent is and how maybe raising a positive number versus a negative number to an exponent is different. So as always, please be making sure that you are taking good notes. I say that every time so that you're getting the most out of these videos and so that you have something to look at while you are studying or while you are trying these problems on your own. If I ever go too fast, just pause and rewind so that you can get caught back up. And you can even pause at the beginning of a question, you pick out the correct answer, and then watch the video so you can check yourself to see which kind of problems you need more practice on and which ones you know really well. I'm so glad that you are joining us today, and let's go ahead and take some notes. First, let's go over what an exponent is. So an exponent's definition is it tells how many times a number is being multiplied by itself. So you have this big number that's called a base, and this little number is called an exponent, and the whole thing is called a power. So here, this is telling me that I'm taking 3 times itself 3 times. So 3 to the 4th power is really 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. It is not 3 times 4. Don't make that mistake because they're going to throw that in there as something you can choose. Now, when we have negative numbers being raised to exponents, you need to be careful. So if the negative number is being raised to an even exponent, so the 2nd power squared, 4th power, 6th power, your answer will always be positive. Now, if you are raising a number to an odd exponent, so 3, 5, 7, so on, your answer is always going to be negative. And then it's important that you watch where the placement of the parentheses are. So here, this first one is telling us that you're taking -3 and squaring it. So I'm raising a negative number to an even exponent. This here means I'm taking -3 times itself once. So -3 times -3 is +9. Now, when there's no parentheses, that negative isn't part of what's being raised to the power. It's just the 3. So here I have a 3 times a 3, and the negative just floats down through the answer. So this one is -9 because there's no parentheses saying that you are squaring the negative also. So here you just square the number. And here they put parentheses in to make it more clear that you're doing the same thing in the last problem. So here they're telling you you're only going to square the +3. So that means I'm going to have 3 times 3 times itself. And then that negative still floats on down through the answer to give me an answer of -9. This slide here is probably the trickiest stuff with this lesson, so make sure that you have these examples copied down in your notes so that you can refer back to it and try to make it as neat as possible. This first question is simplify 4 to the 1st power. So that means I'm going to take 4 and multiply just the 1 4. So that means I'm just going to have a 4, and that makes my final answer D. Anything raised to the 1st power is just itself. So you can write that down in your notes. Anything raised to the 1st power is just itself. This next question says to solve 4 to the 5th power. So that means I'm going to multiply 4 5 times. So it's going to be 4 times 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. And you can type that all straight in your calculator. Just make sure you're keeping track of how many times you press the 4, and make sure that you maybe do it twice just in case you accidentally pressed the 4 button and did it only 4 times, or accidentally did it an extra time. So just check yourself with these because it's easy to miscount. So I would always do this twice. So when you multiply 4 times itself 5 times, you're going to get an answer of 1,000 24, which makes your final answer D. This next question says to simplify 1 to the 8th power. So that means I'm going to take 1 times itself 8 times. So I'm going to have 1 times 1 times 1 times 1, that's 4, times 1 times 1, 6, times 1 times 1. And this one you can use in the calculator, but you shouldn't need it because 1 times 1 is 1, 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 times 1 is 1. So 1 times itself 8 times is still 1, and so that's going to make your final answer D. All right, so here, this is where we need to be careful because we're multiplying or raising a negative number to a power. And so this is a negative number being raised to an odd power, which means that my answer is going to be negative. And now let's look at why that is. So this is telling me I take negative 13, everything that's in parentheses, and multiply it times itself 3 times. So I'm going to have negative 13 times negative 13 times negative 13. So when you take a negative times a negative, that's a positive. And when you take a positive times a negative, that's a negative. So that's why your answer here has to be negative. And knowing just that will give you your answer because there's only one choice that's negative. But it's always good to double check it. So you don't have a negative button in your calculator, but you can take positive 13 times positive 13 times positive 13. And when you do that, you're going to get 2,197. And they give you that as an answer, but you have to remember, okay, when I have 3 negatives, that's going to make my answer negative, and that's going to make my final answer B. Now I'm taking a negative number and raising it to a even power. So according to our notes, that's going to be a positive answer. And once again, just knowing that, there's only one answer that's positive. So that's probably going to be my answer, but we always want to check it to make sure that there's not something crazy going on. So here, because this negative is inside of the parentheses, it's telling me I'm going to take negative 9 and multiply it twice. So I'm going to have negative 9 times negative 9. A negative times a negative is going to be a positive answer. And then 9 times 9 is 81. So that means positive 81 is going to be my final answer, and B is that answer. For these last 2 problems, we're going to need to remember about order of operations. Order of operations, there's 2 ways that you can remember it. Some people remember it using PEMDAS, and some people remember it using Please Excuse My Dear Aunt Sally. And the P stands for parentheses or grouping. And there's different types of parentheses. These are all parentheses. E stands for exponents. And so that could be the squaring or powers that we've been working with. Or in the future, that could be square roots, which is the opposite. Those are both examples of exponents. Then the M and the D go together. They stand for multiplication and division. Here's multiplication symbols and division symbols, and you work those from left to right. So even if division is first, even though it's second in the acronym, you still do it first because you always work multiplication and division left to right, and that's the same with the last 2, addition and subtraction. You always work them left to right. So if you have a subtraction, addition, subtraction, you don't do the addition first. Everyone wants to make that mistake. You always do subtraction, addition, subtraction. You work them left to right. So this problem first, we do have parentheses, but there's no operations in the parentheses. The parentheses are just there to show us that it's just the 10 that you are raising to the 3rd power, and they're there also to show multiplication. So we don't have a P, but we do have an E, which is exponents. So we're going to do those exponents first. So 9 to the 4th means that you're going to type 9 times 9 times 9 times 9 into your calculator. Not 9 times 4. Don't make that mistake. You're going to take 9 times itself 4 times. And when you do that, you get 6,561. Okay, and then I have this other exponent I'm going to do, and it's raising 10 to the power of 3. So that means I'm going to take 10 times itself 3 times. So I'm going to have 10 times 10 times 10, which is 1,000. Okay, and then I copy down the rest of the problem. I still have the plus, and I still have the 6 times the 1,000. So now I'm going to look at multiplication and division, left to right. So I have one multiplication and no division. So I'm going to do 6 times 1,000, which is 6,000. And then I copy down the rest of the problem. And then I look at the addition and subtraction part of order of operations. And I just have addition, so I go ahead and add those two together. You could rewrite that vertically, or you can work it out on the calculator, either way. And you finally have your final answer, which is B, 12,561. Our last problem, we're simplifying this expression. So once again, we're going to have to look at order of operations. The first part of order of operations is parentheses. And I do have parentheses here, but there's no operation in there to simplify. It's just showing multiplication. So there's nothing I need to do there. So then I look for exponents. And I have 2 exponents here. So I'm going to go ahead and simplify those first. So 8 raised to the 4th power means I'm going to take 8 times itself 4 times. And you can work that out by hand, or you can use the calculator, but either way you should get 4,096 when you work that out. And I still have that as times the 3 in the front. Then my other problem is 3 squared. So I'm taking 3 times itself. So multiplying the 3's there twice. So 3 times 3 is 9. And I still have that subtraction between them. And so now I don't have any more exponents. So now I'm going to look at multiplication and division, left to right. I only have this multiplication. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And you can type that on the calculator or work it out by hand. But either way, you should get, when you multiply 3 times 4,096, you should get 12,288. And then I still have the minus 9. So there's no more multiplication or division. So I move on to the addition and subtraction part, and that's left to right also. I just have the one subtraction to do. And so when I take 12,281 and subtract 9, my answer is 12,279, which is going to make my final answer B. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you learned something new.